Hello, and welcome to World of Warbirds. I'm Brian Pierce. Hello, Warbirders. Imagine this. You're a German infantry grunt on the Eastern Front in World War II, curled up in a cold hole. It's the middle of the night, and although nowhere is truly safe, night is better. You're so tired, you just want to nap and catch up on a few Z's. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, you hear a crackling, whistling sound from above and streaking towards you. From dozing, your tired brain comes up a few levels of consciousness to alert, and maybe you open your tired eyelids to stare up at the inky black sky. Although you know very well that the sound is that of wind whiskering through the flying wires of a biplane with a throttled back engine, your tired brain fancies that it's actually a gleefully grinning female riding a broomstick overhead, pointy hat firmly planted on her long hair flowing in the wind, about to visit death upon your head. It's a night witch, the Nachthexen. But before we get to the story of the night witches, though, let's back up a bit and learn about their broomsticks, the venerable Po-2. This aircraft began life as a replacement for an earlier biplane known as the U-1, and the U-1 was going to be a tough act to follow. The U-1 was a copy of the British Avro 504, and this biplane was an incredibly successful aircraft. Over 11,000 examples had been built by Avro and others, including Russia, where they were affectionately known as Avrushkas, or Little Avros. But Soviet aircraft designer Nikolai Polikarpov was not daunted, and he set out to work creating what was to be known as the U-2. Now, that is the only time that I'm going to refer to the aircraft by that name, because I think most people, myself included, will be fighting back images of either the Lockheed spy plane, or maybe Bono and the boys cranking out Where the Streets Have No Name. From now on, I will use the designation that was later used for the aircraft, but only after Polikarpov's death, Po-2. So this aircraft, which was to become venerable, was powered by an engine that was even more venerable. The Shitsov M11 was produced in the Soviet Union for almost 30 years between 1923 and 1952. They built in excess of 100,000 of these engines, and they provided power for a vast number of Soviet, Bulgarian, and Polish aircraft. And even, when mounted in a pusher configuration, were the engines for combat sledges. It was a 5-cylinder, air-cooled, radial engine that, depending on the version, delivered a reliable 100 to 150 horsepower. So to improve on the U-1, they went back to the drawing board. Staggered single-bay wings with rounded tips were used. There were tandem open cockpits for an instructor and pupil, a conventional cross-axle landing gear, and a much larger rudder. The prototype of the Po-2 first flew on 7th of January 1928, and a legend was born. The biplane showed great longitudinal stability, making it virtually impossible to spin out in flight. Sometimes the story of an aircraft is more about what it is, its designs and features. I think about the P-61 Black Widow here. Sometimes it's more about what it did, in terms of participating in famous historic battles. The Spitfire and the Battle of Britain will forever be tied together, even though, yes, I know that there were actually more Hawker Hurricanes involved. Was there anything revolutionary about the Po-2? Not really. Was it a war or even a decisive battle winner? Also no. In the case of the Po-2, the story is more about the sheer number of tasks it accomplished in so many places and for such a long time that it has earned its place in the pantheon of aviation greats. At first it was conceived as a 2-seat primary trainer, but very soon was found to be adaptable to many roles. Over 9,000 were built as the Aeropol, a single-seat agricultural crop duster aircraft with a hopper built into the rear fuselage, capable of hauling and dropping 551 pounds, or 250 kilograms of crop chemicals. Often, double wheels were added to the landing gear by welding a second rim to the original to help out the aircraft when taking off or landing on wet and muddy fields. There were versions with 3 cockpits built for Aeroflot during 1934 and 1939 for use as passenger and mail delivery. If more comfort was wanted, there was a model with an enclosed rear cabin for 2 passengers, which was known as the limousine version. There were float versions and a geographic survey and air photography version. It continued in production in the Soviet Union and its satellites until at least 1959. The total documented number completed is greater than 33,000. Although, with the hectic numbers built by just about anyone who could in multiple countries, the end production could possibly be as high as 40,000 units. But where the Po-2 really earned its reputation was during the Great Patriotic War, which is what World War II was and is called in Russia. Of course, it continued to be built and used as a trainer, but then its use expanded to the role of light transport and liaison. But just as one use was found, more were added. There was a light artillery, observation and reconnaissance variant with an observer provided with an army radio. The voice from the sky propaganda version had a loudspeaker for addressing enemy ground troops. There were air ambulance versions. Now, all of the above rules would seem to make sense, but the next one wouldn't seem to be sane at all in the modern aerial battlefields of the Great Patriotic War. They called this version a light Sturmovik, which seems a major stretch to call this trainer/agricultural biplane that would fit very well in World War I, a light ground attack aircraft of World War II. In the same vein, I think I'll start calling my Cessna 172 a light jumbo jet. But a large number of pre-war aircraft went through the conversion beginning in 1941, and a new production line picked up from there and just didn't stop. One 7.62mm, that's a 0.3-inch SHKAS machine gun was mounted on a ring over the rear cockpit, and racks for 120 kilograms, that's 264 pounds of bombs, plus rails for 4 RS-82 rockets were added to the wings. It soon began to have a high reputation amongst the Soviet troops that it was helping out, and earning the nickname Kukurunzik, or corn cutter, resulting from its successful and very low-level operations. But where the Po-2 would really achieve its greatest fame was at the hands of the Soviet women pilots of the 588th Night Bomber Regiment, the Nachthexen, the Night Witches. The women units of the Soviet Air Forces were formed more due to necessity — they needed every pilot that can get their hands on — rather than an ideological push for equality. It didn't hurt that Major Marina Raskova, who was known as the Russian Amelia Earhart for her aerial achievements, had the ear of Joseph Stalin, who decided that there was propaganda value in having women's aviation units. In October 1941, Major Raskova was granted authority and began the formation of the units. The next summer, the 588th Night Bomber Regiment was deployed on the front lines in June 1942 as part of the 4th Air Army of the Southern Front. Their chosen aircraft, the Po-2, couldn't carry much of a weapons load, so up until at least 1944, the women pilots left behind their parachutes in order to carry more bombs. Besides, they flew so low most of the time for the parachutes to even work, so why bother? Because of the low bomb load, the pilots of the 588th were obliged to make many sorties per night, which also added to the harassment effect. There wasn't just one big visit by the Night Witches. They would come as many as 8 or more times per night. The Germans on the ground called the aircraft and their crews the Nachthexen, or Night Witches, due to the fact that they were women, and their technique of gliding in very low with engines idling with only the wind in the wires made them think of witches' brooms. It wasn't just the sound that gave them their scary reputation. Just the mystique of them being airborne women warriors somehow made them more scary than just the usual, male enemy. They were reputed to have almost supernatural powers and skills. In addition, there were even rumors that they were injected by certain chemical compounds. Is it a stretch to call it a witch's brew? That gave them additional strength and stamina to fly and harass them all night long. Even their techniques gave them almost ghost-like powers. Often they would attack in pairs, with one flying noisily here to attract attention, while her partner attacked silently there. Just like witchcraft. Although a flying anachronism, the Po-2 turned out to be a very suitable aircraft for this nighttime ground attack harassment role. Even if the enemy was looking for them with radar, they flew too low amongst the ground clutter to be spotted, and their mainly wood and cloth construction just didn't reflect much signal back anyway, so they were pretty stealthy too. Even if fighters could catch them in the air, their habit of flying amongst the trees and at extreme low speeds made them super hard to hit, with a speedy Messerschmitt Bf-109 and Focke-Wulf FW-190. The Po-2 flew slower than the stall speed of these fighters, which meant an extremely fast window to fire, while diving in the dark, at a target you can barely see, and if you don't pull up immediately after, you'll be in the trees yourself. The Po-2 had multiple nicknames, besides the Night Witches moniker. The 5-cylinder engine had an unusual exhaust manifold system that gave the engine a rattling or popping sound that was easily identifiable even in the darkness. Because of this, the aircraft was known as the Nähmaschine, sewing machine, or Kaffeemühle, coffee mill. And I guess the sound could really get on your nerves, because another name was nerve saw. It was also called the Runway Crow, or Fog Crow, or Iron Gustav, because of the belly armor bolted on the plane to protect it from ground fire. Another humorous nickname was the Duty NCO, because the plane would arrive at almost the same time as that non-com doing his rounds. One ominous Russian nickname of their own aircraft was Kerosinka, or kerosene lantern, as the fabric and wood construction of the airplane made it extremely vulnerable to catching fire when hit by incendiary rounds. In the Soviet system, a unit was called Guards as an honor, and on February 1943, the regiment was given this designation and reorganized as the 46th Guards Night Bomber Aviation Regiment. It served right up until the very end of the war, with 261 women serving and 32 dying of various causes, including crashes, combat death, and disease. 28 Po-2s were destroyed. However, on the positive side of the ledger, the regiment flew almost 29,000 flight hours, dropped over 3,000 tons of bombs, and damaged or destroyed 17 bridges, multiple railway installations, warehouses, fuel depots, as well as 176 armored cars, 86 gun emplacements, and 11 searchlights. They also made 155 supply drops of food and ammunition to Soviet forces. That's a pretty good record for an obsolete aircraft. The regiment was disbanded on the 15th of October 1945, and the witches were demobilized. Although I'm sure some of them would have opted to continue in Air Force careers, there was a push at the end of the war to get back to normal. And for the witches, that meant returning to the traditional roles of wives and mothers. But surprisingly, it was not the end of the story for the Po-2. Like a horror movie creature that never seems to die, the witch's broom just kept on flying without them. In the Korean War, the Po-2 was used in exactly the same role as flown by the witches of World War II, often punching way above their weight. On one attack, a solitary Po-2 hit Pyongyang Air Base and laid a stick of fragmentation bombs across a lineup of P-51 Mustangs, damaging 11 of them, 3 so badly that they never flew again. On the 17th of June 1951, in the wee hours of the night, Suwon Air Base was bombed by 2 Po-2s, and an F-86 Sabre was hit and destroyed, and 8 others were damaged. The Po-2 is also the only biplane ever credited with a documented jet kill. Now, it's not like it shot it down or anything, but still, the Po-2's almost supernatural slow speed caused the loss of a Lockheed F-84 Starfire when the jet slowed down to below its own stall speed and crashed while trying to intercept the low and slow Po-2. Similar to the German nickname of the Duty NCO, UN forces started calling the visiting Po-2s Bedcheck Charlie, and even with the more advanced night fighters and radar of the 1950s, the UN forces had the same trouble in taking them out. Now, they weren't invincible, though. On the 16th of June 1953, a U.S. Marine Corps AD-4 shot down a Po-2, the only verified Sky Raider air victory of that war. In terms of surviving aircraft, I was going to say that there are more airworthy Po-2s around than you would expect. But what am I saying? These things seem harder to kill than a horde of zombies. Slow-type zombies, that is. You know, the shuffling ones that just never stop. Flying Po-2s can be found in the Czech Republic, Hungary, New Zealand, the UK, at least 5 in Russia, and 3 in the USA. I want to wish all the witches and goblins and spooks out there a very happy Halloween, and I hope you all score great victories on the trick-or-treating campaign, and come back with a heavy bag of treats. If you enjoyed this show, please drop some candy in my bag by tossing me a super thanks, joining me as a member, or liking, sharing, or subscribing. Until next time.